One of the things I was going to mention, Nathan mentioned the DOT board, just a little Georgia history lesson. The governor used to appoint all of the DOT board members. The governor did, because at the time when they formed the DOT board, having asphalt in your district was a very important thing in having it across the state. So the governor would pick the people that he knew would help him put asphalt down to continue his governorship. And then Lester Maddox won the governorship. If you'll remember, he ran against Bo Calloway. Mr. Calloway got the most votes, but the legislature decided, because it was under an old county unit system, the legislature had to decide who was going to be governor. And as part of the deal that Lester Maddox made, I'm assuming it was Speaker Murphy, was that, I'm not sure who the speaker.
I think it was Murphy, yeah.
The Speaker Murphy was the fact that he had to give that up. And he gave it to the House and the Senate, and of course you have more House members than you do senators. And so in fact what it did is really turned it over basically to the influence of the Speaker of the House. So that was just one of a couple of deals that they had to do to swap off for Lester Maddox to become governor. Nathan asked me to speak about some of the differences and some of the similarities between the Georgia House and the U.S. House. And I'll go with some of the similarities first, because there's not that many. But the similarities are relationships. And if you're taking a political science course, you need to understand that politics is all about relationships. You're going to be, if you're in the Georgia House, you're going to be one of 180 members. It takes 91 to get any legislation passed, and if you've only got one vote, you've got to have the relationships to get other people to come and see your point of view. In the U.S. House, you have 435 members, which means you have to have 218 votes. And that's a feat in itself. I mean, there's just not that many bills every year that's passed through the U.S. Congress, for the simple reason there's so much diversity up there. And so, if you don't ever build relationships in your political career, I don't think you're going to ever be able to move forward. And that's one of the reasons that it's so important for these guys and girls when they go up there to get involved in their committee work and the other assignments that they get, so they can make sure that they build these relationships. The other thing that's the same is that if you're a member of Congress, a member of the Georgia House, and hold an office anywhere, one of the things that you don't ever want to do is to lie to one of your members about how you're going to vote, or if you're going to support them or not, because that's just kind of the golden rule. You just don't do that. Now, if you have a change of heart, change of opinion, then the thing to do is to go to them and tell them that you had that change of heart, and then you get fussed at, but most of the time they understand. But that's something that you have to build. Those relationships and that trust is something that you have to build. A little bit about the differences. One of them is on how the budget is done. In the Georgia House, and in Georgia in the Senate and the House, you have the Appropriations Committee. And they budget and appropriate the money. So it's a one-step process. All the agency heads goes in front of the governor. The governor puts forth a budget, having worked with them. And then he gives that to the House and the Senate, and the state is a budget neutral. It has to balance. The budget has to balance. So typically the governor, and I don't know that Governor Deal did this, but typically the governor will send the budget with a little fudge room in there. You never did that, did you, Governor?
We told them up. We told them up front we didn't use up all the money.
Yeah.
And we allocated about $50 million to each body for their local projects.
Right, and that's typically the way to do it, because that way you're going to get support from all different sides of the aisle and from both bodies. But in Congress, you have actually a budget committee that will, and the president will send in a budget by, I think it's middle of February. And then the House, anything that comes out, and the same thing in Georgia, anything that comes out as far as spending, appropriations, taxes, comes out of the House first. And so they go in front of a budget committee. The budget committee and the appropriations committee both interview these agencies and try to find out where their needs are. And then the budget committee will get the budget passed on the floor. And then it's up to the appropriations committee to take that budget, that top line, and it's really confusion when you talk about a 301B or 301A or 302. But what ends up happening is all those there's 14 appropriation bills that have to go through the House. And so they're split because the agencies are so big. In Georgia, you only vote on one. And you can try to amend it, but I've never known that it's been amended many times. But you will vote on 14 different appropriation bills in the House, and then of course, once that's done, it will go to the Senate, and then of course they'll have the conference report. So if you're a member of the House, you're going to get several bites of the apple when it comes to the budget. You get the budget portion of it, and then you're going to get the approach on each of the bills, knowing that the final version is yet to come, because the Senate is going to take and they're going to make their changes. So you actually get 2 or 3 bites of the apple when you start to look at that budget. And a lot of times there's not a lot of change, but most of the times during an appropriations hearing, or at least when the bill comes to the floor, there'll be as many as hundreds of amendments. And some of them pass and some of them don't. But and most of them are political wedges that somebody's offering to try to drive a wedge between them and a prospective opponent, or to do it for the differences in the party's philosophy. So that's a big difference that we have. The other difference is I was on reapportionment. I did the reapportionment for the NRCC in 2010. In the state of Georgia, you know, every state after 10 years, they do a census, and then they take that census and they reapportion the states. And that makes up the congressional districts. They take the population, they divide it, and so Georgia has gained 2 congressional districts since I've been in Congress, or since I was there from 2004. We're not going to get another seat this year, but California could supposedly lose a couple. Texas is probably going to gain due to the minority population moving there. A lot of people are moving out of California and moving to Texas and hopefully to Georgia. And so it's going to distribute. Right now, California's got 53 seats. It'll probably go down to about 51, hopefully lower than that. But that's about where it looks like it's going to go. So you do that on the state level. And so it's real important for the members of Congress to be kind of friends with their people in the State House and the State Senate, because they're the ones that draws those districts. The districts were drawn with a pen and a paper. And the census came out and it gave a rough idea of where these people live. But now with all the community surveys, and I don't know if any of you have gotten these community surveys or not, but they send the community surveys out, and that way they kind of keep the population, the census, kind of rolling. And when they do that, it gives, you know, what the average income is, you know, how many people are married, how many single, what the population makeup is, demographic-wise. And so there's a lot of information that comes through that. And then they put that into computers now. And so rather than having that pen and pencil and drawing it as close as you can, now they draw it down to where it's 0 deviation. And so that's the reason you'll see a lot of these districts. If you hear somebody complain about, well, I'm in the 3rd district and my neighbor's in the 4th district and he lives across the street. That's how perfect they get it for the one man, one vote. But all that's done on the state level. So on the national level, it's important that you control the legislature. And when we started doing this in 2010, we identified 20 different bodies that we could flip in different states. And most of them had Republican governors. And so we knew that if we could get the control there, that we would have more influence on the redistricting process. So we targeted 16 different bodies, both state house and state senate districts across the country. We actually ended up flipping 20 in 2010. And so what that did, Republicans went from controlling 85 congressional seats in total to controlling 212. And so that is the reason I think that the House flipped and stayed, is because we had so much voter turnout and so much of the state that happened. And so that is a big contention right now because redistricting is coming up. They're going to be doing the census. And then in 2021, there'll be some special sessions in the Georgia legislature, in all legislatures, unless you're in a state that only has the one. But it'll come up, and so you're going to have a lot of lawsuits because right now that's what's going on with former President Obama and his Attorney General, Eric Holder. They formed a group that is doing nothing but really going around suing a lot of these states over what they did with the maps. North Carolina is a prime example of that, Illinois, Ohio, Pennsylvania. And so I think you're going to see a lot more of that because with computers now, it's really hard to fudge some of that stuff, especially the demographics. They know if you vote, they're going to know if you voted in a Republican primary or a Democrat primary. They're going to know if you're a switch voter, if you vote some Democrat, some Republican. They know all this. And so that makes the process even worse. Now it's not what your race is or what your community is. It's gotten down to where they can base it on political affiliation. And that's the reason that I think there's such a big contrast in the Georgia House and the U.S. House. In the Georgia House, if you were sitting on the floor, you may be sitting between two Democrats. Or if you were a Democrat, you may be sitting on a whole row of Republicans. And when you go to a committee meeting, you could be sitting next to a Democrat or anybody else. It's just kind of an open seating. And the House, the floor seats are assigned by the Speaker, but not necessarily by the party. And so it's an easier time building those relationships because you sit next to your neighbor. When you get close to somebody, you become a friend with them. It's a little bit more difficult to have a bigger difference. Unfortunately, in the U.S. House, it's segregated. The minority has one side, the majority has another side. Same thing in committees. You have a majority side and a minority side. You have a chairman, you have a ranking member. And so that is a big, big difference. And I think that's the reason you see so much partisanship in Congress rather than what you do in the state legislatures, because it's just a barrier there. In fact, when you go to debate, in the U.S. House, if you're going to go to debate a bill, they have a floor manager that comes from the committee that the bill came out of. Not necessarily the author of the bill, but a floor manager. And he's given X amount of time by the Rules Committee. And the Rules Committee will meet and they say, okay, the majority's going to have 1 hour and it will be equally divided between the majority and the minority. Then the minority will have a floor manager and you go down. Each side gets 30 minutes or an hour or whatever it is. And that floor manager, if he said, Congressman Dill, you're recognized for 2 minutes, then that's all the governor would have, would be 2 minutes. And so they apportion that out. So you never really get to openly debate your opposition. They have, if you're going to debate with them, you have to yield your time to them, and then they would have to yield their time back to you. And that just is not something typically that's done, yielding time back and forth. So it cuts down on the actual debate. Now, I think the Georgia House has gone to some type of portion of that, not all of it, but I think they have gone back to limiting the time of the debate. I don't know if they actually have to live. Do you know that? I mean,
On
do you know,
some of the
Chris?
more contentious bills, they'll limit, some contentious bills, they'll limit the time of debate to 2 hours, 1 hour,
Yeah.
equally divided.
But, yeah, and so I don't know that they yield each other. I think it's just equally divided time. But when you get into a situation where you're on the committee on the floor and you can't actually debate directly with somebody, it makes it more difficult to really understand the issues. And I think that's what we're going to get around to in the impeachment trial, is you're actually going to have the members asking questions to both the councils and get some direct answers. But if you notice, the House members, the House managers had their time, and then the President's managers had their time. There wasn't any back and forth. And so it'll be interesting to see how the question is handled, where that both sides will get to answer the same question, or a different question will be presented to both sides, to different sides. So you got that going on, and that's a big difference. And I'm gonna give you an example of it. Peter Welch from Vermont. He's about as far left as I am far right. But we got to be really good friends. I'd take him peanuts, he'd send me maple syrup. So we got to know each other, we kind of hung out with each other and on the floor. And so one time we got together and said, look, let's have a dinner. Let's put together a dinner. Lynn, you bring 2 of your friends, I'll bring 2 of my friends. And we'll sit down over dinner, I'll fix dinner at my condo, and we can talk. And we'll talk about some of these issues and see if there's not some common ground that we can come up with on some of these really divisive issues. So I picked 2 friends and he did, and we were going to do that. And then at the end of the night, if everybody, we all were healthy when we left, we were going to take and say, okay, we'll expand it. You do 4 friends next time and I'll do 4 friends next time. Well, Peter came up on the floor with me and said, we're canceling the dinner. And I said, why? And he said, well, the media's found out about it and they've got cameras set out outside my condo. Well, people just weren't going to go. Especially if you were in a district that maybe was far left, your constituency might not have liked it if you were seen going to have dinner with the far right. And so that's how divisive it's gotten. And if you go back to 2010, and this is somewhat of a difference, because federal issues are actually bigger issues than a lot of the state legislation that's passed. And some of that legislation just doesn't anger people to the extent that some of the federal legislation does. In 2010, the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, had been passed. There was a large constituency of people that were upset about being able not to have their same doctor and losing their current insurance coverage. So in 2010, the Republicans defeated 63 incumbent Democrats. And I think we ended up with 87 Republican freshmen and 9 freshman Democrats. Because of the anger over the Affordable Care Act, a lot of these people have gone out and campaigned and said, I'm not going to, I'm going to vote to abolish it. I'm not going to vote for any budgets. I'm not going to vote to increase the debt limit. Because these were all national issues being discussed on Rush Limbaugh and MSNBC and all these different shows that get people fired up. It's both sides, the base is fired up. And so those were big issues. And so when you look at the numbers that came in that first 2011 session, you see that out of the 87 Republicans that were elected as freshmen, probably 75% of those were to the right of our conference, or the center of our conference. They were more to the right. If you look at the 9 Democrats that were elected, they were basically to the left of the Democratic caucus. And so what you had, rather than things going together, you had them coming apart. And I think we'll see that today. And if you look at the last election where the Democrats took over, then you'll see that with the squad and some of the other members, their party has moved further left. You just don't see that kind of swing in a state legislature, or at least not that big a swing, and not that big a swing because of any 1 or 2 particular bills that were passed. So those are some of the differences and some of the similarities that goes on in the state legislatures and the U.S. House of Representatives. The other thing is a lot different driving to Atlanta than it is flying to D.C. And so your travel is just a lot more cumbersome, I guess, or takes up more of your time having to go back and forth. We were very fortunate being from Georgia. We were an hour-and-a-half flight where some of these guys, it takes them a day to get there. And then the time change. We were very fortunate for that. But anyway, I'll be glad to open it, Governor.
Let me ask you to talk to them about continuing resolutions.
Yes.
Okay.
Continuing resolutions. As I said before, in the state legislature, you have to have a balanced budget. Well, in Congress, they have what they call a continuing resolution. If nothing could be agreed on, if the budget and the appropriation bills couldn't be agreed on, they do what they call a continuing resolution. What a continuing resolution is, it's the same amount of money that was in the previous budget. And because of that, they're just continuing on with the other budget. If there was any new programs that were initiated in that last budget, but they weren't going to be continued according to the continued resolution, those programs would get the same amount of money that they had the previous year, even though they weren't in existence. And so if you had, whether it was the military that needed to build their budget up, or that felt there was a need for a build up a budget, they were still going to get the same amount of money that they got the last time. And unfortunately, that money can't be swapped around. And so that's the reason when you hear a lot of, I guess, the reconciliation and some of the other terms that they do, that's where they go back and can gather that money out of these unused agencies to be able to spend on something else. That doesn't happen a lot. And the continuing resolution is what keeps the government open. And as you'll remember, Republicans, Gingrich shut it down in 96, I guess it was, 97, somewhere in there. It lasted, I don't know, about a month, I guess. And then the Republicans, it was shut down again due to some differences in the budget. And I think it was shut down for about 14 or 15 days then. And once the government shuts down, the president basically is running everything. I mean, he's got the final authority on national parks, and President Obama did shut down the national parks. You can't imagine how many of your constituents are out visiting a national park and they can't get in. You know, and they'll call and say, hey, we drove all the way out here to Montana or Colorado or, you know, the battlefields up in North Georgia. Can't get in. And so it puts a lot of pressure on the members, and then of course you've got the press calling saying, you know, are you going to give up your salary? You know, you're going to put it back in the Treasury, which is actually illegal. But it doesn't matter. You know, in politics, perception is reality. And so when it comes down to a continuing resolution, I hate it. I hate it because I feel like we get paid to make tough decisions, and there's no reason why there couldn't. Conference report couldn't be agreed upon. But I guess for probably, I was in Congress 12 years, I'm going to say probably over half of those were run under a continuing resolution. And that's just not good government. But unfortunately, the divide is getting pretty wide up there, so I would imagine we're going to see some more. A continuing resolution can go for 1 day, it can go for 3 days, it can go for 3 months. I think the last, huh?
And it can be renewed.
And it can be renewed. That's right. I mean, you know, if you we'd make it good for a month. Now, the tactic that most of them use is, of course, the federal government's budget is up September 30th. And you would think, and this is probably too common sense, but you would think they would start working on it maybe in August, July, to try to come up with a budget. No. They're going to wait till September 30th at midnight. And that's crunch time. And so you can either vote for it, or you can vote against it. If you vote against it, then there's going to be a shutdown of the government, or there's a continuing resolution. So you don't have that many, you know, options. And so what they'll do, sometimes they would go from September 30th to October the 5th. But most of the time they go to around December the 20th. Because that's about a week before Christmas. And so they know everybody wants to get out for Christmas. And there's probably already been an election. Every 2 years, you know, there's an election. So if they put it off until December, then they may have gained a majority. Or, in the case of the Republicans 2 years ago, they lost a majority. And so they had written the budget. And so there's just a lot of different reasons for them, and these dates are pretty specific. A lot of the continuing resolutions would be based on when the Treasury said that we wasn't going to be able to pay our bills. And of course, all of those are just projections, but like I said, in politics, perception is the reality. Anything, one of the other things I'll talk about is I was on the Benghazi committee too, and that was a committee appointed by the speaker and the minority leader, and that lasted 2 years. And that was a very interesting time. And it's funny now because being on that committee and seeing all the witnesses that the former administration blocked from testifying in front of our committee, it's kind of funny that this same group is now, you know, blaming the president for blocking people in his administration for testifying on this issue. We had a number of people that had been in the administration that we tried to call as witnesses that worked in the White House, worked in the West Wing, worked in the the Situation Room when this was happening, that the Obama administration wouldn't let testify. So this isn't just a one-way affair. And I wanted to bring that up because you can listen to people like Nadler, and you go back to when the Clinton impeachment, and he'll say things about, he shouldn't be impeached, he didn't do anything wrong, and now everything that he said was okay is now not good. Same thing with Dershowitz, and what he said about Clinton. No, you can't impeach him on that, and now he's saying something different on this. And so politics, to me, it's hard for the American people to keep up with what it is or what's going on, because there's so much swapping people's attitude or opinions about different things based on what their political affiliation is rather than what they know to be right and wrong. Any questions or is there anything else?
The Benghazi incident may be something that's too much ancient history for y'all, but tell them a little bit about what that was, and if they are interested, I believe the good book that was written by one of the troopers, one of the military that were there, it's 13 hours.
13 hours, yeah.
Some of you probably, those of you in the military probably have been exposed to that, but a great book.
Yes.
Detailing of it. Tell them a little bit about how it all came about.
The book is good. The movie is a little puffed up with all the explosions and different things. I don't think there was quite that many, but for Hollywood, you got to blow something up for effect. Read the book, and then two, if you really want to get serious, read our report, which is about 700 pages, but pretty detailed. But Benghazi happened in Libya, and what was going on is that, of course, the former administration, we had pulled our ambassador out, and so they put in a temporary, I think they call it a consulate. And so what they did is they rented 3 different villas, but they were all connected. That's another story in itself. But anyway, and so we rented that, and then Ambassador Stevens, who was then just a consulate, came in. They opened up this facility, and it was called a temporary mission facility. And he was actually stationed in the capital, but he would come down to Benghazi. He had been in Benghazi before. He felt a real close connection to the Benghazi people. So he wanted to come down. He made a special trip down to do an opening of a American division of one of the schools in Benghazi. So he came down, and of course, he only had, I think, 3 security people that traveled with him, and this is the same road that the British ambassador and others had gotten blown up on. Everybody had left Benghazi with the exception of the United States. The Red Cross, all the other countries that had been there had already pulled their flags out because of some of the disturbances that had been going on. But he came down, not really very secure. There were some officers there that were stationed there, and they were stationed on what they call temporary duty, TDY. Everybody, military guys into that, right? So they were on temporary duty assignment, so they were only there for like 60 or 90 days. And so if they gave input into how to address the security concerns, because you got to keep in mind these villas, in one of them it was 8 acres of orchard. And so if you're in the military and you're trying to protect something, you want to make sure that you've got good defensible positions, and you also want to make sure that the enemy is not going to have positions around you that they can have cover of. So it wasn't really that good a location. They had the personnel there. I think there was 5 there, and those guys they're heroes too for what they did. But they had a gathering out front, kind of suspicious of what it was, but they had a gathering out front, and then they decided they were going to go in and burn the compound. And the ambassador and his communication guy was unfortunately killed in that. And then, of course, the CIA had a facility there, and those guys were actually called to go over to the compound, to the temporary mission facility, and they were actually the ones that rescued that. It was not known up until then that the CIA actually had a facility there. And their job, there's a lot of different stories that go out, but their job was basically securing man pads, which is these shoulder-fired rockets that can shoot down an airplane. And they were taking those out of Libya and sending to Syria. And so they were trying to do everything they could to get enough intelligence of how these things were going over, because that's when all the conflict was going on in Syria. And what was his name in Libya?
Gaddafi.
Gaddafi was gone, so they were shipping all this stuff out. It was just a really bad situation, and the response was terrible that the United States had. If you read the book, I don't know if it goes into that detail. I hadn't read it, but if you read our report, we were never going to Benghazi. We were never even going to Libya. They were going to stack our troops in Italy and then go in if they had to. But fortunately, Gaddafi's security team is the one that came in and rescued our guys. So the guys that the new government had thrown in were actually the ones that we called. Some of our military guys called their friends that they knew from the Gaddafi regime. They actually showed up and took our guys back to the airport and put them on planes and got them out safely.
But it became an issue with Hillary Clinton because she was the Secretary of State.
She was the Secretary of State.
And the reports were that they were asking for reinforcements, and there was never any response in that regard.
There was never any response, and those were some of the people that we wanted to talk to and to interview. And if you'll remember, the storyline of the day, if you remember this, was that it was a video that had been made that was, I guess, offensive to Islam. At the same time, they were having some uproar in Egypt. And so the State Department blamed it on that video. But I don't know if you've ever been to Benghazi, Libya, but they don't have a lot of local TV and a lot of national TV. So I don't think they ever knew that the disturbance was even going on in Egypt. And so there was a lot of communications that was intercepted by intelligence that showed that they didn't know anything about that. This was just a group of hoodlums, quite organized, by the way, because there were several leaders from different factions there that were the ones that attacked the embassy. But the problem is that the Secretary of State was blaming it on the video when they knew full well it wasn't. They had the CIA guys on the ground that were sending them information, so they knew it wasn't. And then if you remember, if you paid attention, Susan Rice went on 5 TV shows and talked about it being a video, and you wonder, well, why didn't the Secretary of State go? And the more we dug into it, we found out she didn't want to go because she knew it was a lie. But her staff is the one that gave Susan Rice all the information, which was wrong. And then, of course, when it came out that it was wrong and not the truth, she's the one that took the hit and not the Secretary.
I've talked to them briefly about job opportunities at both the state and the federal level. Talked to them about internships and what an intern would do, and committee meetings that go on, especially in Congress, and who gets to go and who gets to listen.
Sure. Intern, you know, I'll give you a perfect example of an intern. Brian Jack was an intern for me for 4 months. He's from Peachtree City, Georgia, so he lived in my congressional district. He came to DC, just soaked up everything he could learn about politics and about the federal government. He now does the scheduling for President Trump and works in the West Wing. And so he originally, when the presidential races came out, he went with Dr. Carson. And then after Dr. Carson dropped out, he went and started campaigning for President Trump. He did that, but through relationships, he got to know Nick Ayers, which was worked for Governor Perdue, and Mark Short, who worked for Vice President Pence. And so they were probably all interns. I know Nick Ayers was an intern at one time. And so they all got to know each other, and they've all risen up. So being an intern, especially if you can do for a member of Congress, is a great opportunity. And I promise you, Washington, D.C. is more of a college town than Dahlonega, Georgia. And the difference is, and I didn't wear a coat and tie, but the difference is, in D.C., these young people come up, they wear a coat and tie because they work in a congressional office, and the girls pretty much in business attire. And so when you go out, you see these young professionals is really what kind of stands out to me, even though these young people are still in college. It gives them an idea to at least dress like a young professional. And it's really an amazing time that you get to go sit in on these committee hearings. The last intern I had when I was on financial services, he is now in the banking business. And so it's just a great opportunity to network, to get to know people, and to build relationships. If you look at some of the interns in the Georgia House, and I can think of 2 or 3 that just stand out to me. Brian Tyson was an intern that I had. He then drew the redistricting maps for the lawsuit in 2002. We won a federal lawsuit, and Brian Tyson was 21 at the time, interning for me, and he is the one.
1995, we won the federal lawsuit and allowed us to go back when we failed to pass the redistricting at the state level. When you and I first met, when Zell Miller sent us to federal court, that's when Brian was a teenager.
Yep.
And was an up-and-coming lawyer and was the best and brightest.
Yeah, and he now is the governor's and the state's lawyer for all the election law. He has been fighting the federal lawsuits about the election machine and other differences that Ms. Abrams had with the vote count and all. Brian has been the lead attorney in defending the state and those issues when he was the lead attorney against the, not really the lead, Ann Lewis and Frank Strickland were, but he was their main assistant going against the state for the redistricting. This young man goes all over the United States testifying in redistricting cases. So that's another example of an intern. The young lady, Sarah Larios, who was an intern of mine, is actually the person that sued Eric, was it, no, it wasn't Holder, it was, was it? No, it wasn't Holder, it was the Republican. I can't think of his name, one from Missouri. But anyway, she actually was the one that filed the lawsuit. She is now an attorney also in Zimbabwe, representing young people that are being imprisoned by the establishment over there. So this internship, you build relationships. Some of the most successful lobbyists at the state capitol were interns at one time or another. And so it's a great opportunity for you. I don't know if North Georgia has the intern, University of Georgia does, I know. Do y'all do?
Yeah.
Be great to apply. It's really a neat experience for young people to do it. Now, well, you may not fit in,
Don't worry.
you may not get in the age bracket, but, because I know how old you are. But it's a great opportunity, and I'm telling you, you know, just the relationships you build, just the things that you get to do, it's unbelievable. So I would strongly suggest that you at least make an attempt to do it. I don't know. There's usually only a handful that get to go, but I think they're mostly political science students. So if you get an opportunity to do it, the governor will be glad to write you a letter of recommendation and see if we can get you up there and get you into the mix.
Well, we see what the questions are.
Yeah. Questions? Anybody? Yes, sir.
Who's your favorite person in congressional leadership at your time in Congress?
In congressional leadership?
Yeah. Whether majority or minority.
I was, I'm very good friends with McCarthy, but I guess my favorite guy is Scalise. I've traveled with him, Jennifer, his wife, and my wife are very close, and so he's a good guy.
You know, Steve Scalise from Louisiana, he's one of the ones that got shot
Yeah.
out on the softball field.
Yeah. And he's just a great guy, so I'd say, you know, he's probably my favorite as far as the leadership goes. I think he's a good, honest guy and doing everything for the right reasons. Get extra credit if you ask questions. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. I had like a quick, just a personal question, if that's okay. I saw like on Facebook you were looking for like your ancestors' Bible book. Could you talk about that, like,
Yeah.
like about the story behind that?
Well, I'll give you as much as I know. My great-great-grandfather joined the Confederate Army when he was 82 years old. Story has it, the reason he joined was to look after his two nephews that had joined. I think 8 months later he was dead, he died of the measles, but one of the nephews had a Bible that somebody had found at a bookstore or a garage sale. And so they put on the Facebook page, which just because of my personality, my staff wouldn't tell me how to get on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or anything else. So I didn't even know how to get on it, but they called.
They couldn't get you off.
Yeah. So I got a phone call from one of my former staff members that said, hey, I was just kind of going over your Facebook page and I got this inquiry. And so we tried to call them, but never got back in touch with them. And so I called the Sons of the Confederate Veterans up here in North Georgia, because my family is from North Georgia. In fact, Robertstown, Georgia, any ever heard of Robertstown? That was named after my great-great-granddaddy. And so they were from that Helen area, so I called up the Sons of Confederate Veterans from that area to see if they knew the person that actually had found the Bible. But they didn't, but I would love to, if you have that,
Sadly, I don't.
yeah,
But if I hear anything, I'll let
if you
you
hear
know.
anything else, if you would call me, I would really appreciate it. You don't have the Bible, right?
I do not.
Okay.
I have just another question
Yeah.
for you. Like from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, in one of the articles that you were named to lead the clean energy group. And you said, in quote, we're addressing the future of renewable energy in a way that makes sense concerning our planet's resources without making extreme and unrealistic measures. Could you like elaborate on that? Like what
Sure.
thoughts were that came to mind when you said that?
I was called by a young lady that used to be on my staff that now works for this Conservatives for Clean Energy, and she asked me if I would chair. And I said, you know what, I don't think so, because I'm not a climate change guy, you know, I mean, I just, you know, I think that we have somebody that controls the climate. But anyway, then I watched part of the debate that the Democratic presidential candidates had on climate change. I don't know if any of you watched it or not, but pretty extreme measures. So I called Teresa the next morning. I said, I'm in, because there's so many things that we can do for clean energy that does not go to the extremes of trying to do away with all fossil fuel by, what is it, 2030 or 2032 or whatever it is. There's so many other things that we can do. And what I have found works best in government, if you can get people to start being innovative and do things, you know, whether it's segregating your garbage or whatever, it multiplies much faster than the federal government making people do something. And so if they do it on their own initiative and see that they're doing good, it takes on a totally different concept than the federal government or somebody else telling you that you've got to do this, when some of it doesn't make sense. I mean, look, plastic straws. I don't know how many get in the ocean, but there would be a better place to start rather than a plastic straw. To me, you're just making a political statement that you're going to do away with plastic straws. Look at all the other things that are plastic. You know, whether you're talking about things that hold your Coke cans together or your beer cans, and I mean, you know, the bags. There's a lot of other places that you could start. When the Democrats took over in 2007, first things, the speaker has control over the cafeteria in the food service. Well, the first thing they did is they got rid of the food service people that were there, and they hired a food service group that only made healthy food. It was not really edible. I mean, it was stuff that I wouldn't normally eat, like sprouts and, you know, kale and, you know, many different things. And used to, I'd go down and get me a good sausage biscuit. And now I could get a turkey sausage biscuit, but not a pork sausage biscuit. And then they decided that they were going to do away with the plates and the utensils and replace them with some biodegradable stuff. The one thing they did have was great soup. I love their soup. But the unfortunate thing, when you put your spoon in the hot soup, it turned into a paddle. It would melt. And so you could get back to the office and you take your spoon out and it was all deformed. You couldn't even really get any soup on it because it was made out of corn. And of course the heat did it. So to me, that's not really something that would motivate people, you know, to be into the clean energy or the green energy. And so that's what I wanted to do. And, you know, I mean, it's just like solar. Look at how far solar has come since it was first initiated. Generator, whether it's from wind, solar, battery, whatever it is, you know, power companies will buy it and put it on the grid. It makes electricity more expensive, but at the same time, it's healthy. And, you know, solar panels, remember when we gave Solandra a loan for $700 million, I think, and they bankrupt on it? This was a energy company, and they were supposed to have all this new technology, and so, you know, we gave them this grant, $700 million bucks. Next thing you know, they're belly up. They had nothing new because there was no incentive for them to get out and be creative or entrepreneurial or whatever, because when somebody gives you that kind of money, you get a little lax. They got a lot lax. And so we're the ones that took the hit. Whereas now, we do some research, and we will give people the information that we get from our research, but we're not gonna fund somebody else's business. Our job's not to make winners or losers. Is to see what people are gonna do on their own, and then if we can be a helping hand, then that's what we need to do. Government, when people look at government, I don't care if you're talking about state government, local government, federal government, government's job should be to help people, not to put up hurdles and roadblocks and red tape to keep people from doing something. How many of y'all, if you saw a truck pull up in your driveway, you're at the kitchen window and you see a truck drive up in the driveway that's got on this door, United States of America government? How many of you would go to the door and go, hey, y'all come on in? Want a cup of coffee? No, the first thing that goes through your mind is fear, like, what have I done? And so that's just an attitude that we need to change about our government, is that we should be there to help and to get rid of hurdles and make people perform better and give them the encouragement to do it, rather than doing the things that we do to stop that entrepreneurial spirit that's been in America. And I think that's one thing that this administration has done, is really encourage the minorities and the blue collar people to understand that they can get out and do some things, and we're not going to put up the barriers to keep them from doing it. And maybe, was that okay of an answer?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, because I know in the UAE, they're experimenting like at universities to where they're applying like degradable plastics and other renewable programs. And I guess this is a follow-up to your answer. And answer is part of it is, do you think localities or universities should be laboratories to experiment to see if the idea implements, if it's a good venture?
I do. If you look at all the inventions that's come out of Georgia Tech as far as our intelligence community goes, that it just come from students, just like you, that had an idea. And now they're able to monetize that idea. They were a student, they were paying to go to college, and through their research that they were doing, they found this, and whether the college gets to monetize it or they do or some company does. It's to me, it's the way to progress and to make progress is to do this. And if you University of Georgia's got a facility in Griffin that is for food containment and food, how long it takes it to spoil and other things. You can't imagine all that goes into trying to figure that out. But if you look at it, it's not something that everyday person would think about, food safety. And so these students are there looking at this stuff, and it's something that we'll use, and our kids and our grandkids and everybody else will use. And so if it wasn't for, the university system, I think offering people the ability to do it, would anybody be doing it? And so I think that's the reason that education system is so important to some of the advances that we're going to do in our technology. Yes, sir.
As you're talking about, the between the two parties, there's been a lot of increasing disdain and animosity between the two over the last few years. Do you think we should just have more compromises, or do you think it's just going to get worse over the next 10 to 20 years?
Well, compromise is not a bad word. The only problem is the definition of what a good compromise is to one side is different, from what the other side is. To me, the compromise should be based on your political party or what your political party's agenda is. It should be, the compromise should be, what is it going to take to get it done that benefits all Americans? It's not just something that's going to motivate the left, or it's not something that's going to motivate the right. It's a compromise so we can get something done and move forward. And that's the one thing, if you look at what the Republican leadership and what the Democratic leadership go through as far as compromise. The Freedom Caucus was started in 2012, I think. And it had about 40 members. It grew and had about 40 members. And look, I'm as conservative as anybody else. But when your leadership gets the best deal that they can get, and your own people won't agree to the compromise to keep the government functioning, they're going to go to the other side to get the amount of votes that they need to pass it. Now, if you go to the opposite party to get enough votes to pass your legislation, you're going to spend a lot of political capital. You're going to give a lot of things away that wasn't originally in the bill to get them to vote for it. And I think what, and whether it's the far left group that Ms. Pelosi's fighting with right now, I think most people have to understand that to accomplish your goal, you need to move the ball forward. You can't just stay still. And so in some of these instances, people want a home run. They want a touchdown pass. They don't want to run off tackle for 3 yards and move the ball. And that's a problem that I see for both parties, is that they have people that are unwilling to compromise because they're not getting everything they want. This country, the political bend this country's had over the last 50 or 60 years has been to the left. So you're not going to get it all the way back to the right in one piece of legislation. But if you can get it a little bit, then you won. And that's the thing. I mean, I use a military example. If you're in the military and you at point A and you want to go to point D, and you got to go through B and C to get to D. If you get to B and you don't advance any further, do you turn around and go back to A? No. You plant your flag and say, look, we've come this far. Next, we're going to go to C. And I'll give you an example of the patience that some people in Congress have. Henry Waxman was from California, and I think he was from that San Francisco area. He retired about 4 or 5 years ago. He was chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, which the governor served on, that wrote the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. When you look at Waxman's history, he had been there for over 40 years. His first campaign, you know what issue he ran on? Was his main issue? A single-payer health care system. It took 41 years to get there. And that patient, but when I was in Congress, if I had told my constituents, look, this is the start of a journey and we should see completion in 40 years, they would throw me out of office. But that's the kind of determination that you have to have. And you've got to continually be moving the ball forward, not just sitting still and not backing up. But if you can gain 3 yards, gain 3 yards. If you can score a touchdown, that's great. But if you have to just grind it out, and that's what both sides are so polarized right now that their bases want touchdowns. They don't want 3 yards in the cloud pass. Yes.
You talk about moving the ball forward towards a certain goal. What is your goal in politics?
My goal in politics is to stay at home. Right now I'm doing, I do some consulting work, but I don't have, I'm done. I don't believe in term limits, but I served 12 years in the Georgia House, and I got to be the minority leader there for the last 4 years. And then an opportunity came up to go to Congress, so I took that, and I served there for 12 years, and then I made a decision to come home. I think that our founders never made this to be a lifetime event. And I think people know when they're ready to go home. I mean, John Dingell served for 53 years in Congress.
And his
got out.
father had served before him in the same.
His father had served for 25 years before him. So I tell people there was a Dingell in that seat for 75 years. And now guess who has the seat?
His wife.
His wife. And she's had it since John retired. And so and the reason I made my decision in 2004 to run for Congress, I looked around and there were people there that had been in the Georgia House for 35 and 40 years. The longest serving person we had probably been there for maybe 20 years. So we always had fresh, new people coming in. And so there was always new ideas that were coming into our party. We felt like we had the best ideas and, you know, the best candidates and so forth. And their side was more stale. I mean, and they were used to doing things like their daddy had done. And I mean, we had people that were there when the flag was changed in '57. And so, you know, when you're having a debate about, you know, whether you're going to change the state flag that was changed, you know, 40-something years ago, and you can go to one of the members and say, what was it like then? You know, and he gives you a first-hand detail of what it was like. And so, to me, like I said, I don't believe in term limits. I think people need to have the ability to vote for who they want to, and if they want to keep somebody there for 100 years, that's fine with me, as long as they can do it. But I think people need to realize that they have a shelf life. You know, a lot of people up there are expired and don't know it, but they need to come home. And I used to tell I did freshman orientation one year, and I told all the freshmen, I said, look, before you were elected, you got up every morning and shaved or put up makeup, and you saw somebody in there. After you get up here and you get sworn in, if you ever look in the mirror, you see somebody different, go home. And I think that's what a lot of people fail to do. They get elected to somebody, and then they turn into somebody else. And that's not good for them or good for us. So, yeah, my desire is to play with grandkids and cows and stuff like that.
Got a question for that.
Yes.
You talked about earlier continuing resolutions and how you didn't like the idea of them.
Was that what?
The continuing resolutions
Yeah.
on budgeting time. So with that being said, recently they passed the omnibus legislation. Would you prefer the omnibus legislation where you don't even know what you're voting for through parts of it, or do you prefer the continuing?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, the omnibus bill, I voted against the omnibus bills because, to me, if you were in the House and you voted for the judiciary budget, or you voted for the transportation budget, or, you know, whatever budget it is, the omnibus was all 14 at one time. Then they had what they call a mini bus, which might be 3 of them or 4 of them or whatever. So if you looked at that bus and it was exactly what we had passed out of the House that you had voted for, then I'm all for it. But a lot of times it wouldn't be there. And I mean, it would be something totally different. And so, yeah, I mean, you don't have a good choice. And that's the reason that I think a lot of times we just take the chicken way out rather than do something. You know, that Congress, and whether you think those members need a raise or not, we pay $174,000 a year, and I'm sure it was less when Nathan went up there. It was probably, I don't know, 90 or whatever it was. But you really have 2 households. And to live in DC is very expensive. And so, you know, I slept in my office. I slept on the pull-out sofa for 8 years. In my back, my chiropractor will tell you exactly what it did. But at the same time, to rent an efficiency, it was $1,800. In Georgia, when I went into the state legislature, it paid about $9,000 for the 3 months that you were there, and then you got a per diem, you know, if you went to work. And what I saw happening was, and the reason I voted for both pay raises, when they did the one in the House in 2006 or 7, I can't remember, I think it was in 6, and the one in the Georgia legislature. The Georgia legislature went up to 17,000. The U.S. House went up to 174, where it's at now. What I realized in just looking around is that if we didn't do something to get everyday folks to be able to take off their work and come up there and do people's business, that we were going to end up with millionaires and crooks. You don't want your government to be made up of millionaires and crooks. Because, you know, I mean, I'd love to be a millionaire, don't get me wrong. But once you get to a certain social status and a certain place in the food chain, you lose your concept of what's going on with the everyday guy. You know, I mean, it's not even you're around anymore. And so, and then if you're a crook, you're there to take everything that you can take. So you got the millionaires wanting to give away everything, and you got the crooks wanting to take everything. We need a good system that is everyday people walking around that's got good common sense, that understands what it's like to get up and have to go to work and to deal with some of the things that we have to deal with every day. And right now we're losing that. I mean, there's 42 people that I know it from the Republican side that said they're not going to run again. I don't know how many from the Democrat side, but most of those guys were elected in 2010. They were small business owners. One guy owned a professional football team. I mean, it was all different kinds of things. But once they get in, they see that they're beating their head up against the wall for nothing. I mean, that's a lot of money, but when you're keeping 2 households and you're traveling back and forth every week and just working every weekend, it's just not a lot of benefit. So that's the reason I think we've got to do something to kind of restructure the way that's done, because it's hard to get the right people, right mix of people going there.
Please show your appreciation for having,
Thank you.